One of the best ways to get along with someone who's from a different generation is to actually think about what it would have been like for them as they grew up. Some of the things that we did with the Crucible Project was intensifying that, just really having a think about how would that have affected who they are now. It was very practical. It really focused on having empathy for others and also trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Hi, my name is Martin Brooker. Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast today. My guest today is a leading expert in intergenerational dynamics and helping leaders with generational changes to build mission-driven teams. Dr. Joe Azzapardi is a consultant, researcher and speaker with over 24 years of experience in education, ministry, leadership and community engagement. And originally from Canada, he now lives in Australia. So Joe, welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast.
Thanks very much, Martin. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. We met a couple of months ago as a result of you doing your weekend. But what I'd love to do firstly is just, what's the short version of the Joe Azzapardi story?
Yeah, the short version. That's always the hardest bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I was born in Canada. My dad was immigrant from the island of Malta. Mom, fifth generation Canadian. I've got a younger brother and had quite a traumatic childhood, which we'll go into a bit later, but started to come out on the other side in high school, gave my life to Christ, and my life just started to change immensely after that. My academics went up, started to do better socially. I then went on, I got into university, which I was quite surprised at, and ended up getting a Bachelor of Education in biology, so science teacher, which still surprises me today. And I was in the field for 10 years. And during that time, I met the love of my life, Jodine, who I actually met through a friend online back at the end of 2000, which at that point in time was a bit dicey to do that. But anyway, I moved from Canada to Australia, worked as a teacher for about a decade. Then we had a child, moved over to the US to do what I originally thought was a master's in education, but ended up being a MA in youth and young adult ministry. So I moved into the space as a minister, which I said I'd never be a teacher or a pastor, but God has a sense of humor.
Yeah,
I then went on to pastor in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba. Pastored a young adult church for a couple years before coming back to Australia as a school chaplain, then did a PhD in intergenerational community well-being and discipleship as well, and then spent about 4 years pastoring after that in Queensland before stepping down and starting my own consultancy, which has been going for about a year now.
Wow. There's a lot in that. Hard to make it a short version, as you said.
It is very hard, and I have cut so much out. Let's just say I have a list of about 40 addresses that I've lived at in my life.
Wow. Well, welcome. And we're here to talk about a couple of things today. And, we met as a result of you going to your initial weekend. I'd love to hear to share with our audience about, how you all found your way to that initial weekend. What was going on for you at the time?
I actually have my wife to thank for getting me to go. I think she had heard about the Crucible at different points in the last couple of years, and I had always been a bit grisly about it. I guess partly because of trauma and how I've found things in my life. And my wife, she really wanted me to go. And I was like, I'm not sure. We went to a men's barbecue at our church, and you were there. You came and spoke, and as did Heis Seegers was there, and he goes to my church. And the activities were got my attention a bit, and it was a safe environment. And Heis personally invited me to come to the weekend, and I said yes. And so I did get there. I was a bit anxious leading up to the weekend because I didn't know what it was going to be about. I had a bit of an idea, but everything was very hush-hush, and I like good surprises. I'm not so much good with surprises. about things that could go pear-shaped. So I went, and it ended up being a really good experience.
What do you think was going on for you in your life at that particular time? Obviously, there was some catalyst there for going to the weekend, but what was going on for you that was probably in the background to perhaps all those interactions?
There actually had been a fair bit of trauma at different points in my life, and that's why my wife really wanted me to go. The reason I went, though, was I had not been treated the best by my previous employers. It had been quite painful. I had gone through a health condition and I was hurting quite a lot. And I had suffered with long COVID and burnout. And I stepped out of leading a church because I felt like I really wanted to do what God had put on my heart. And so while I was launching my business, and that was quite stressful, I still had quite a bit of baggage because of what had taken place in the previous 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. So what was that like? What did you find for yourself as a result of going to the weekend?
What I found was I ended up talking about things that had happened as a child. I actually had quite a traumatic childhood, not on account of my family, but actually because of my primary school experience. My family struggled financially as we were growing up close to Toronto in Canada, and my parents wanted the best for myself and my brother. So being in Canada, they put us in a French immersion school because in Canada, it's quite a good thing to put on your resume if you're fluent in both languages. They were not. So they put me into this school, which was a great thing conceptually, but it was very difficult. Almost every student in the class was from a well-educated and wealthy family, apart from myself. And I had a few strikes against me in the eyes of my classmates. My dad was an immigrant, so I had a really different surnames compared to Smith or Brown. My dad was a mechanic working in a factory. A lot of the classmates, their parents were business execs and professors and much higher up on the scale when it came to classism. Even though there's not a lot of that in Canada, there's still always some there. I was also the shortest in the class, and I was sensitive and I was outgoing at the beginning, and all that worked against me. So I was bullied severely by both the boys and girls in my class. I was told lots of terrible things over the 8 years I was in primary school. Terrible things every day about who I was or who they said I was and who they thought I would become. Because of the constant trauma, I struggled not only socially, but I struggled academically in school. So I was almost always at the bottom of my class. Aside from art class, which I excelled in art, I was almost always at the bottom of the class, which I later in life found out it's probably just because of all the trauma I was going through. Like I said, now I have a PhD and I can look back and say, oh, actually I could have done a lot better. But when you're constantly being threatened and abused, it really impacts a person. So I was physically and emotionally traumatized throughout my primary years by my classmates. And after primary school finished, we did move to another province, and I wasn't bullied much at all there. But due to the trauma, before I started school, I was very outgoing. I would go up to people and talk. But by the time, even when we moved to this new province and this new school, I wasn't really bullied that much, even though it was a much, much bigger school. It was a high school I was going to. I was very withdrawn. I was very reclusive by this point because I had been hurt so much. So I didn't have many friends at all. But I thought it was great because I was not being bullied. That's how bad things had been. I thought it was great, even though I didn't have many friends, just because I wasn't being abused. And so that's actually what I ended up wrestling with when we went away on the weekend. And even though I had forgiven those that had done those things to me as a child, it still haunted me. And there was still a part of me that actually wanted a bit of vengeance for what happened, but just the sense of want to show you that I'm nothing what you thought I was. And for probably one of the first times in my life, I walked away just having peace. Since then, we all have things that we need to work through, and I still have more recent things in my adult life. I actually don't think much anymore about what happened as a child. I'm not triggered as much. So that's what I walked away with.
Honour you for sharing and having the courage to go to those places. And it's difficult, isn't it, sometimes to actually perhaps have a perception about where those things actually affected us. And, you talked about forgiving those that perhaps had been the perpetrators of that bullying at school, yet there was still something inside you that needed to be addressed. And what I heard was that, the weekend helped you put that in perspective.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't realize how much it had been still affecting me. But I sort of realized that unconsciously I had spent much of my life proving what was told to me wrong, proving that I was capable, proving that I would find love and I would have friends and family and all sorts of things.
Yeah. Part of the weekend is just being honest and understanding what grace means. What did you find for yourself in that experience of honesty and grace in a group of men for the weekend?
Well, I felt like it was a safe space where people not only heard me, but they actually cared and they were trying to help me through it. During my time as a pastor, I would share my testimony and people would hear it and they would be stirred by it and it would touch them, but I still felt a bit isolated after that. Whereas I felt as though not only did people hear me, they were also supportive and they were wanting to help me through that and help me to come out on the other side.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much a one-way transaction. And so the group wanted me to succeed and find healing. And sadly, in society, even in the church, it's not always the case, at least practically.
Yeah, it's having a place where we can be honest and actually find grace, no judgment, and a place where you are seen for who you are and accepted for who you are is quite unique, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Very much so.
Do you think if you were standing in front of a congregation now, your testimony would be a little bit different as a result of Crucible?
I actually preached about a month or so ago, and I did give testimony about the same thing. And my wife told me that I was telling the story differently. She said the way I was speaking and the tone I had, it just sounded like I had a lot more healing.
Yeah, wow.
And quite a few people, people usually would come up when I would tell it, but there was a lot of people, there was people in tears. I give that all to God, but according to my wife, who had heard the testimony quite a few times, it was more hopeful, perhaps. It sounded like I had actually gone through a lot of healing compared to the previous times when I would tell it.
Yeah. So you're a husband and father. What was it like for your family when you came home from that first weekend with the Crucible Project?
It was a bit funny. I'm actually an introvert, but I'm very good at switching gears and being social, but I end up getting drained after I do it for a while. And we got back late Sunday afternoon, and minutes after I arrived home, I had to take my family to the Carols by Candlelight in the middle of the city, thousands of people around, which is, in my head, I was just thinking, this is not what I need. Yeah. After a very emotional weekend, it was good, but it was draining. And I love them, so I'm going to take them. But I just thought, I don't think this is going to go well. But much to my surprise and my family's surprise, not only did I enjoy it, but I was very social. I was peaceful. I was joyful. I was just sitting there shocked, going like, I can't believe I'm enjoying all this after all that. That being said, the next day I did crash. All the emotions sort of physicalized a bit. But I still felt at peace and joy. When you process things emotionally, it is like going through a marathon.
What has your wife and your children said since in terms of what changes they've observed in you as a result of the weekend?
I think they noticed that I have more peace. I still have things I need to work through, but they thought I was a lot more joyful and I was a bit more playful when I came home than what I usually am. So those were things that were very helpful.
It's amazing, the little things, isn't it? And, playfulness actually is where we've released something and we actually then find joy in things that maybe we would have avoided beforehand. It's quite unique.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah.
You have to feel safe really to play.
Absolutely. You've done some really interesting work. I know when we first met and you were talking about the work you did in your PhD, I think it's relevant for the people, the listeners of this podcast, is that there are challenges, we probably notice them. We actually talk about them in the work I do. I know that people talk about intergenerational challenges, and that's been part of your PhD research. Can you sort of give me a little bit about what is that work you do, and how do you help leaders address intergenerational challenges with their teams?
Sure. Well, the work I do, it's trying to answer the question whether well-being, discipleship, and intergenerational relations influence each other. For me to answer that question, I actually had to come up with a way to assess intergenerational community. And I found out there wasn't anything out there, not just in church world, but in corporate world, there wasn't specifically a way of assessing that. So one of the primary things that I do for businesses and different industries, I also do it for churches as well. I will do an assessment with the business, and the assessment gives us the data to actually know how are each of the generations feeling about the other generations, how they're feeling about whether or not they have a voice, whether or not they have an attitude of inclusivity when it comes to other age groups. Sometimes some people feel like they're better off if it was just their generation, so it assesses things like that. Who are they talking to? And so it looks at, do they feel a sense of connectedness, not just as a whole, but also in relation to other generations. And it looks at all those things. It also looks at how each generation feels about things like leadership, their remuneration, benefits, and tailored specifically to industries as well. Different industries have different things that they want to know about their employees. And so instead of making assumptions about this is what everyone from that generation needs, the assessment actually focuses on specifically that community. So from there, I can make recommendations where I actually know this is what they need because their own people have told me this is the areas that they are finding challenging. So once we do an assessment, there's recommendations that I give, recommendations that they can work on themselves if they want to, or if they would like me to help them with. I do more consulting and coaching work. I do workshops and seminars. If there's some particularly low scores in certain areas by a generation, we do focus groups as well, where we get a small representation of people from that generation in that organization, and I just sit down with them and find out, hey, this is what you guys scored on as a whole. Why do you think that's the case? What is the background to that? And then finding out what could be done to help improve those scores, not just by the company, but also what are some things that you guys might be able to do so that you can work with the company to improve the environment. Yeah. So those are some of the different things I do, because one of the biggest struggles is turnover. Yeah. It costs 1.5 years salary on average to replace an employee. So if you have someone coming in and they're only there for 2 years, 3 years, that is a lot of money that an organization has to fork out, particularly looking at the younger generations. They tend to switch gears quite a bit. And so I help organizations to understand, well, these are some of the things you can do to reduce that, because when you have a happy workforce, people are going to be more efficient. There's going to be less conflict and less turnover.
What are the myths that people have about the different generations? You know, like there's 5 generations in our workforces nowadays that have different sort of characteristics. But I make up a story that there are plenty of myths around the different generations and what they actually need and what they want.
Yeah. Well, one thing that really continues myths is, while we can generalize what a generation identity is and the values they hold and what's important, there is a point where there's only so much that we can actually generalize that. The reality is a generation is defined by 2 things: the time period they grew up, but the thing that most people neglect is it's also defined by the culture they grow up in. And there is the family culture, there is the culture of where they grew up, there is the country culture, there's the ethnic background, there's the religious. So there's all those different things that also combined with when they grew up. That's actually what determines a generation. So there's only so far you can generalize. While there is characteristics that we can say some generations tend to have, a myth is that this is actually true for every single individual, because that's not actually the case. Gen Xers are part of the reason why they have their characteristics, because many of them grew up in a time where there wasn't very much parental supervision at all. Parents weren't around much. But there are Gen Xers where that wasn't the case, where their parents were around a lot. where they were given lots of opportunities. Similar thing for millennials. There's a lot of generalizations that millennials are very tech savvy, but there are some millennials I've met where I'm a Gen Xer, I'm a young Gen Xer, but there's millennials that know less about tech than what we would think. And so one of the things that really pushes the myths is thinking that we can put everyone in a box. But someone who grew up in Texas in the 1980s is not necessarily the same generation technically as someone who grew up in Vietnam in the 1980s, because culture holds a lot of weight as to what that would have been like for them.
Yeah. And I guess the country of origin and a mixed workforce of different, not only generations, but ethnicity and country of birth.
Socioeconomics, like if someone grew up poor versus someone grew up rich, that has a huge influence.
I'm curious, what did the Crucible Project weekend experience give you that you think you might be able to use with your client work?
Yeah. Well, one of the primary things that I tend to focus on when I do my work is empathy, teaching employers and just regular people. One of the best ways to get along with someone who's from a different generation is to actually think about what it would have been like for them as they grew up. Some of the things that we did with the Crucible Project was intensifying that, just really having a think about what would it have been like for that person? How would that have affected who they are now, even though that may have taken place 10, 20, 50 years ago? It was a really good example of something that I do promote. It was very practical. It really focused on having empathy for others and also trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Yeah. And the activities that we did, it really helped me to see the power of that, particularly when we take it to the next level and we do it one-on-one with people, and just the power, how that really connects us. And if we could do that across generations and understand that, well, that generation's not trying to annoy you. The reason why they tend to do that is because of how they grew up. It's what happened while they were growing up. That's why they're behaving the way we do. So with Crucible, we really emphasize that point, particularly on a one-on-one level, not just in a big picture level, which is what I tend to work with.
Yes. When you were speaking then, what was going through my mind was the value that a weekend like Crucible gives, which is actually teaching you just to be present with your own thoughts and feelings and being able to make better choices in how I respond to the situation in front of me. So I can see how that would be applied in the work you do, that teaching leaders how to better apply themselves to the moment and to be present to the moment, so that not generational type in them. You're actually saying, hey, this is a human in front of me, and being present to that.
Very much. Doesn't matter what generation someone is from. We all need people who can just hear our stories, and every generation actually craves mentorship. And there's a huge lack of that in society, and being able to be part of Crucible is a really great way to be able to be mentored and to mentor others as well. And there's huge power in that.
Yeah, cool. So if somebody was thinking about going to a weekend, what advice would you give them?
I'd advise be open-minded and be willing to be vulnerable, and to know that the different experiences and activities that you will go through, they may seem very foreign and strange, even though it might be hard, just to exhibit some trust the process. Yeah, I guess that's one of the things I would advise.
Yeah, we all need to get better at trusting processes, don't we? And
yes, yeah. And
building relationships of trust, I think that's part of it, and sounds like that's the work you do as well. Joe, thank you so much for giving your time to be on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And go well with the work you're doing around that intergenerational sort of work and helping organizations step into leadership with that as a focus as well. So, thanks
so much. Really appreciate being here. Thanks very much for having me. I hope this has been a blessing for those hearing.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.